Tuesday Seventh-day Adventists, a revival of original Adventism and ancient Christianity, presents Escape for Thy Life. Good day, this is Brother Medina for Tuesday Seventh-day Adventist, and please let us start with a word of prayer. Gracious loving Father, be with us as we enter into this presentation. Bless everyone that pays attention to these shocking facts and help them to make the right decision for their lives' sake and for your glory's sake, we pray. Amen. Well, today our topic is shocking facts. Shocking facts. And we want to show you facts about vaccination that the mainstream media never told you. Yes, my dear people. We want to show you what has been going on because they have not told us the truth. There has been so many propaganda and lies that we do not know the truth except we do special research to get scientific evidence about vaccinations. And this is what this video film is all about. We will talk less and let the experts talk more as we deal with vaccine facts. Yes, my dear people. So let us look at this first clip showing us protesting going on all over the world. Let's see why this is so. So what you are seeing here in this video are protests taking place all over America and over different parts of the earth. That's what you are seeing here. But why this sudden protest in all these different parts of America? Because there is a sudden push for removing religious exemptions from vaccines globally. Yes, my dear people. And we are seeing that even in Trinidad, we are seeing that in different countries in the EU, in Europe, in Latin America, different places of the earth where there has been religious exemptions from vaccination. All of a sudden, bills are being passed to remove religious exemptions and other exemptions when it comes to vaccination. Now, the point we want to say is this, is that it could not have been that each of those single authorities decided to move all together at the same time to remove religious exemptions. The fact that they are all moving at the same time wherever in the world is clear proof that it is a conspiracy. Somebody decided to move coordinatedly to get rid of religious exemptions. Yes, my dear people. And this is the reason why we are telling you it is a conspiracy. They actually moved coordinatively to get rid of religious exemptions. So this is really a fight against religious liberty. It is religious liberty being attacked under the guise of vaccinating all. That's what it is all about. So you have to fight for your religious liberty. You have to fight for your liberty of conscience. You have to fight for your freedom of choice, because it is in fact religious liberty that is being removed under the guise of vaccinating all. Yes, my dear people. And this is the reason why we are telling you time is late. Because if religious liberty is being removed slowly and surely we know the mark of the beast will soon come, which will cause a lot of people to be lost. May God have mercy upon you, that you would protect your religious freedom in your country, wherever you are, by fighting back with the truth. Yes, my dear people. Yes, my dear people, let us look at horrible things about vaccination that we were not told by the mainstream media. Look at these things that happened. When you see these things happen, you need to protect yourself, you need to protect your family, you need to protect your friends. But more so, you need vaccine freedom, which is religious liberty, which is liberty of conscience, and which is freedom of choice. Yes, my dear people, and see to it that your government procure these things for you.
The mainstream pop culture narrative tells us to trust vaccines and labels individuals who do not as anti-vaxxers. But when you look at the history of the vaccine industry, there are many good reasons to question them. In 1986, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program was established to protect the vaccine manufacturers from any liabilities. This program ensured that the taxpayer would pay for all injuries the public suffered from vaccines. Once this protection was in place, government purchasing of vaccines increased by over 300%. In 1994, an unelected board of pediatricians was put in charge of determining which vaccines would be given to your children, all funded by pharmaceutical companies and U.S. taxpayers. Before Presidents Bush and Clinton incentivized the vaccine industry, it was about $100 million a year business. Bill Clinton proposed buying up all the vaccines and distributing them from a warehouse in New Jersey, which Congress rejected. But still, thanks to Clinton's efforts, the government now controls every aspect of the vaccine industry. An industry that has grown accordingly ever since, over 600%. It is expected to be a $60 billion a year business by 2020. Their profits have grown immensely, but what else have they accomplished? Since 1993, there have been 4 measles-related deaths. Now compare this with 483 claims of injury or death from the measles vaccine. Since 1993, there have been 4 measles-related deaths. Now compare this with 483 claims of injury or death from the measles vaccine. The government has settled $4.1 billion in vaccine death and injury claims. The government has settled $4.1 billion in vaccine death and injury claims. According to a New York Times article, the tax on each vaccine is determined by the predicated rate of serious side effects. In other words, not only is the consumer a test subject for the vaccines, but they also pay for any damages sustained from their use. Merck, Sharp, and Dome has been fined billions for multiple crimes over the years, including fraud, bribing healthcare professionals, withholding safety information, and exaggerated efficacy rates. Merck, Sharp, and Dome has been fined billions for multiple crimes over the years, including fraud, bribing healthcare professionals, withholding safety information, and exaggerated efficacy rates. Merck, Sharp, and Dome has been fined billions for multiple crimes over the years, including fraud, bribing healthcare professionals, withholding safety information, and exaggerated efficacy rates. And yet, thanks to the federal government and taxpayer dollars, they continue to thrive. Is it all about money, or is there something else to it? During a 2010 TED Talk, Bill Gates suggested that vaccines help reduce the population. Bill Gates suggested that vaccines help reduce the population. Bill Gates suggested that vaccines help reduce the population. A year later, one of his vaccine campaigns caused 47,500 cases of paralysis and death. A year later, one of his vaccine campaigns caused 47,500 cases of paralysis and death. The India Supreme Court claimed that the drug trials being run by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were illegal. Reducing the population has been suggested and supported for years. Ted Turner told Autobahn magazine that a total population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels, would be ideal. This is what the mysterious Georgia Guidestones call for. When UT professor Eric Pianka came under fire for suggesting that 90% of us should be killed in order to sustain the earth, his students defended him, saying he was being conservative and that everyone should die. In 2009, Baxter Pharmaceuticals was caught shipping millions of contaminated swine flu vaccinations to 18 countries. The entire shipment was contaminated with the live H5N1 avian flu virus. In 2009, Baxter Pharmaceuticals was caught shipping millions of contaminated swine flu vaccinations to 18 countries. The entire shipment was contaminated with the live H5N1 avian flu virus. In 2009, Baxter Pharmaceuticals was caught shipping millions of contaminated swine flu vaccinations to 18 countries. The entire shipment was contaminated with the live H5N1 avian flu virus. If one wanted to create a pandemic virus, this is one of the easiest ways to do so. Today, mandatory vaccines are being forced on children in New York. Government bills are being proposed to remove religious and philosophical exemptions and to exclude unvaccinated children from schools. But if you question any of this, then you are a crazy anti-vaxxer.
They often tell us that the doctors know best, that the doctors ask your doctor, consult your doctor. But what they didn't tell us is that doctors do not go to study vaccines, what are in the vaccines, and the effect of the vaccines upon people. That's not the line of study doctors do. They don't know this thing. They don't actually know. So don't be fooled with if your doctor says so. And when you hear many doctors speaking about this, they do not know. So here are many doctors telling you that that's not the study they pursue when they actually seek to do doctoral studies.
You may not know this, but doctors are not taught about vaccines in medical school. We are not taught what's in vaccines as far as the adjuvants. We are not taught how vaccines are manufactured as far as what kind of animals go into them. We are not taught the potential dangers of vaccination, and we are basically given a piece of paper that says when the vaccines are due and to give them.
I've been in vaccines for 35 years. I didn't know that Rogam had thimerosal in it. So I think a lot of the doctors were unaware. They were unaware that even the word thimerosal meant mercury.
I ran in a pediatric emergency room, and if people came in and they weren't vaccinated, I was quite upset. And it's not that I knew much about vaccines. I did a pediatric residency. You don't really learn anything. You're taught the schedule. That's really what you're taught about vaccines. You're taught the schedule, and you're taught that it produces antibodies, and that's it. You don't get any information on innate immunity and Th1 to Th2 and, the risks, none of that.
I'm an osteopathic physician. I'm a board-certified medical doctor that I've been in my own practice since 1985. When I started in what I call my first life or my first career, I was an emergency medicine physician, and I was the director of an emergency department here in Ohio for about 12 years. All of that time in my medical training and background in education, I always thought that the only thing that was in any vaccine was a little sterile water, a little dead virus, or a little dead bacteria, and that was it. When I started looking as simply as looking at the package inserts of the vaccines and started finding out that many of them are made from cow serum, kidney monkey cells, chicken embryos, dog cells, human embryo cells, chicken mouse brain cells. I had no idea that all of those things were in vaccines.
My field, the field of immunology, the basic field, the ones that sort of is responsible for all these theories of immunity, we don't really deal with the real world. We do research in labs. We are sort of an ivory tower profession, and we don't even read these publications because this is too far away from our field. We only read what's specific to our research, and usually it's immunizations and how antibodies are generated and all the details of the immune responses.
I started medical school in 1983. I'm now learning 14, 15 years later that there's mercury in vaccines. How come I didn't know this? So my question was, well, what else is in there? So I just started to explore more of the package inserts, more of the manufacturing processes, more of the adverse effects, and started reading the literature that doesn't get near medical schools and residency programs. And I started to realize that there was more information to learn than what I was originally taught.
This is the problem that I see. We don't train our medical students to be critical in terms of looking at research. We don't train our medical students to be critical about the corruption in the medical industrial complex. And so what we have are the worker bee doctors on the streets, in the offices, even in the institutions, that are clueless about corruption, and they really buy the drug company rhetoric at face value.
I went through my whole PhD training, and I believe that vaccines give you immunity, and that if you got vaccines, there is absolutely no way, virtually no way, that you would get a disease. And I'm pretty sure that most of my colleagues in my narrow field believe the same way, and we had conversations about that. And even someone at some point mentioned to me and said that they had a vaccine and they got measles, and I sort of brushed it aside, and the person is confused. It was either she didn't have the vaccine or it wasn't measles, one of the two. But what happened is that a few years ago, I had to apply for American citizenship, and part of the procedure is to submit your vaccination records, right? And this was the first time that I looked at my own vaccination records carefully, and I discovered that I had 2 measles vaccines in my childhood. Well, I didn't know about it because I was too young to remember. But what I remember really well is that when I was 11, I had measles. And so that was a little bit harder to discount. And I told recently someone else, and they said, oh, you are confused about that. You didn't have measles. Like, how do you know? Like, did you check your, was really the virus there or not? So it just, the doctor's diagnosis, right? But I lived in Ukraine, and there, there was tons of measles around, and doctors knew when they saw measles. But anyway, so the reason I kind of had to look for these papers is to confirm to myself whether I'm confused about my measles or is this a general phenomenon and it's happening, and it's documented in the literature, and indeed it is documented in the literature. But immunologists don't know about it.
I know that most doctors really have not learned to look at research papers. They don't bother to read them, and if they do read them, they really don't understand how to look at them with a critical eye in terms of the variables and how it's set up with bias. So once I talk to them and challenge them, it turns out that they back down and don't really know what they're talking about. That's very common. They'll just say, when it comes down to it, what they do is they take the drug company salesperson's information at face value.
I was taught in residency, in medical school and residency, that vaccines are safe and they were effective, and that there's absolutely no reason to question it because we've done all the studies. What I've realized is that the safety that I would want for kids, having taken the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm, is not happening. The vaccines are not safe the way we're told that they're safe. The injection of these materials has never really been evaluated in different age groups in pediatrics or in adults. We don't know where vaccine materials travel. We don't know if they go into the brain. We don't know if they go into the liver. We don't know if they go into the lymph system. We don't know if they get intracellularly and destroy mitochondria and nuclei. All we know is that they give you an IgG antibody and the disease seems to disappear, but we're not really looking to see if there's an adverse outcome greater than the actual disease process itself. I think it's hard for any physician who is so invested in the love of the children and the love of their practice to actually step back and say, am I doing something that's hurting the children in my practice? Because the foundation that's broken after they may realize that there's more that they knew, that they actually were wrong. Telling a physician that they're wrong is not an easy thing to do, let alone to have the physician actually admit that the physician is wrong. To hear a physician, it took me years to say, I don't know.
Yes, my dear people, there have been a lot of cover-ups about the facts of vaccine damage to people. You don't hear these things on the mainstream media. The mainstream media don't tell you how much people get damaged from vaccination. This speaker himself knows of people who got damage from vaccination. Terrible, terrible damage, life-threatening damage, and damage that have been with them for all their lives. But you don't get this on the mainstream media. They do not report these things. So we want you to look and see in this clip why they have been covering up these real facts that you need to know to make an informed choice.
Here's why the story of Dr. William Thompson at the CDC is so important. The MMR autism study was the last study ever done at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, looking at the connection between vaccines and autism. This was the study that stopped all funding from the government of the United States to research, do vaccines cause autism? So if you think of the importance of this study, and then you think this is the study where Dr. William Thompson, one of the senior scientists at the Center for Disease Control, he stepped forward and said, we manipulated the data on this study, we omitted data, and we threw data out to hide the fact that we saw a causal link between the MMR vaccine and autism. Specifically, this study was looking at age that children receive the MMR. The theory that was being questioned is, the earlier you receive the vaccine, does that make you more likely to be diagnosed with autism? And that's exactly what they found in two specific groups. In the African American group, they found that there was a 2.64 increase in autism if a child got the vaccine between 12 and 18 months versus if they'd waited till after 3 years old. And then there was isolated autism. These were children that they'd isolated autism out, meaning autism was the only issue they had. They didn't have epilepsy or other comorbid issues. These were perfectly healthy children for the first year of life. Then after 1 year, they had environmental impact right at the time they would have received the MMR vaccine, and they declined into autism. These children, this includes every single race, And what they found was there was up to a 7 times increase in the risk of autism if one of these healthy children got the vaccine between 12 to 18 months versus after 3 years old. Now, people will say, well, what about all of the other studies that prove that vaccines are safe? And I would say this is the most important study. This is also the most important health agency in the world, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. If you look at your newspapers, you watch the news, the WHO always refers to the CDC. The CDC is the most important body. So we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. If they've committed fraud on the MMR autism study, what other studies have they committed fraud on? This is obviously a pattern of behavior, and if you see Vaxxed, you'll see that it doesn't just exist inside of these 5 scientists doing the study. It goes all the way to the head of the CDC, Dr. Julie Gerberding. So if the CDC is committing fraud and has gotten away with it for over 10 years, how can we look at all of these other studies and not assume that the same thing is taking place? Especially when you look at the fact that many of these other studies are coming from universities that we know are getting funding from the pharmaceutical industry. It's very hard to track the funding from the pharmaceutical industry into the CDC, though we see people leaving jobs from the CDC and then going and working for the pharmaceutical industry, just like Julie Gerberding, who is the head of the CDC at the time of the MMR study, which was made by Merck. The MMR is made by the company Merck. Well, after this study was over, a few years later, Julie Gerberding got a job at Merck as head of their vaccine department, a multi-million-dollar job. So when you see that sort of cross-contamination, the CDC, you have to assume that there's some sort of connection going on there. So that we know is happening in the CDC, but all of these other studies, clearly, we see the funding going to the universities that were coming out with these studies. And we have to question, how far of a reach does the pharmaceutical industry have into all of our testing? And then if you think about the fact that something like a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study, which is the most important study we need to do, those studies are being done. Studies like that are being done, and they can't get published into any of the medical journals. And why is that? Again, we can see that the pharmaceutical industry is affecting the medical journals. So how do we change this? How do we get real safety studies being done? We've got to create an independent safety study body that is firewalled against the pharmaceutical industry so that we can make sure every single vaccine is safe. It's imperative. This is something we're injecting into our children, into our babies. We inject a Hep B vaccine into a 1-day-old infant. And I just found out 4 days ago, the CBS just ran a story saying that we now have more 1-day infant deaths than every other industrialized nation in the world. In fact, we have 50% more babies die on the first day of life than all of the other industrialized nations combined. So you have to ask yourself, why would that be when we have the best medical system in the world? And when you ask yourself that question, look at the fact we're one of the only countries that inject a vaccine of a sexually transmitted disease into a 1-day-old baby. Hello, welcome to the world, take your first breath, and here's your first sexually transmitted disease. It doesn't make sense, and we need a scientific body that starts making much more sense, because we can no longer trust the CDC. They have failed the United States of America.
Yes, my dear people, in conclusion, nothing was said here to stop you from pursuing whatever course you want to pursue with regards to vaccination. But what was said here is to make you get a situation where you can have free choice with regards to vaccination, where you can have your conscience being touched, so you can have liberty of conscience, so that you can have religious liberty with regards to vaccination. What we have done is to give you information that will make an informed decision with regards to vaccinating your children. We support the government because the government has helped the country in a large way come out of real trouble. But we do not support any government seeking to take away your religious liberty or remove religious exemption. And this is the reason why you must have your religious exemption. Your body belongs to God who bought it by the sacrifice of Christ. Your body has been entrusted to you, and you have to appear before the judgment seat of God to give an account of things done in the body. Therefore, you ought to obey God rather than man. So you need informed choices. You need to understand what are in the vaccines, what has happened in history, that you may actually make an informed decision, because God is going to judge you based upon these facts. Don't let them fool you with all the terms of herd immunity and vaccinating the large amount of people to stop diseases to make you more healthy. Those things are not true. Scientific evidence does not show those things to be true. But what scientific evidence shows is that you can receive terrible destruction upon your body, and you need to make an informed decision. If you want to get vaccine, go ahead and do it. If you don't want to, then you need to have an informed decision. And secondly, you need to have religious exemptions. And that is why we call upon the government, do not stop religious exemptions. Do not force children to lose an education because they do not go to a doctor to get a card to enter into school, because all this is forcing vaccination upon people who have religious conviction. And government is supposed to protect your religious freedoms. Yes, my dear people. So may God bless you, and may God help us all until we meet again. In Jesus' holy name, amen.